program on Other Derana 24 is classified MA. It is intended for adults and may be unsuitable for children under 17. It may contain crude, indecent language, explicit sexual activity, graphic violence, or political ideology. Viewer discretion is strictly advised. The following program contains opinions of the participants and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. The network believes in a safe space for all ideas to be expressed without any censorship and on its duty to create such a platform for free speech. Viewer discretion is strictly advised.
Oh, Canada, the land of the naive. The LTTE propaganda is so strong in Canada that the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau buys it in bulk. After failing their homeland mission, the Tamil Eelam managed to find a new home in Canada. With various bogus narratives being considered, the state of Ontario is now officially the new home of Tamil Eelam. Why? Well, wokeism is so strong in Canada that anyone who has a sub-story to tell will get the highest podium. And in other news, the future the Prophet did not see. For insights and analysis, tonight I will speak to State Minister of Foreign Affairs Tarak Balsurya, Sri Lankan Ambassador to China Dr. Palitha Kohana, Law Professor at the Laurentian University, Canada, Professor Neville Hevage, Manager at the Global China Initiative of the Boston University, Tarila Moses, Leader of the Jaffna Civil Society Center, Arun Siddharth, President's Counsel Manohara De Silva, and the Executive Director of People's Action for Free and Fair Election of PAFREL, Rohana Hettiarachi. Good evening, I'm Mahesh Johnny, and this is the State of the Nation. Hello everyone, welcome to the State of the Nation. Thank you very much for your time. We have a lot to sort out for you tonight, so let's get right to it. We are living through a decisive time where so much is being done to open the door to foreign powers to not only claim parts of our country, but now rewrite our history. And quite unfortunately, it feels like we are just bystanders witnessing the event without engaging. We are closing on June 9th, when the so-called heroes of justice took center stage last year. Where are those heroes now? Are we now a problemless nation? Is everything running smoothly? As we look at our leaders in Parliament, it doesn't get much better. We literally had a parliamentarian say that he didn't vote in favor of against the recent motion to remove the PUCSL chairman because the government didn't bail him out when he literally got caught red-handed engaging in nefarious activities. This is clearly the mindset of our so-called leaders possesses. Our choice is to make a call as to whether we are okay with that or if we are willing to hold them accountable. We'll do it. Welcome back everyone, this is the State of the Nation. Now last week we saw the removal of the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, Janaka Ratnayaka, via a parliamentary vote. What was the main reason for his removal? Well, he stood against a crushing electricity tariff hike last year, we all remember that. His case was very simple. The CEB can find the money required from various other methods than taxing the public. Now, the tussle was between the chairman of the PUCSL and the Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Wijesekara. By now, we know that the minister was implementing the recommendations of the IMF. The IMF wants you to pay the cost-reflective price for electricity, hence the price increase. Protocol was followed and due process did take place for the removal of the chairman, but there is a very valid ethics question here. when you stand against the government's measure to cover costs by squeezing the public, should you get booted off your position? And if that's the case, then what's the point of having such commissions? Because no sooner you disagree with something, you are sent home. Does the government want yes people in these positions? Or should there be people who stand for the welfare of this country when the government is not doing what it is supposed to do? I posed that question to the Executive Director of People's Action for Free and Fair Election, Rohan Hettiarachchi, and this is what he had to say.
The government and the parliament do have power to do that. There's no argument on that in legal framework. But that is not the way that they should handle it, because I think that both sides, there should be some sort of negotiations, the discussions, because why we are having these two different entity just because of the check and balance. So the both sides do have power. Both entities are working for the people. Even this Janakaratnaka, even the parliamentarians or the rather government, the both has to work for the people. So both did their job. But this is not the way the parliamentarian should behave or a government should behave. So there should be some sort of discussions among the two parties. And if you look at the parliamentarians voting, for a simple example, when this Ali Sabri Rahim, when he interviewed after the voting, what was his answer? He just said, the government did not support me, so therefore I voted against the government. So what is the meaning of that? That means they are not serious about the matter. They're serious about their own benefit and their own power circle.
I'm not in any way saying that the former PUCSL chairman is pure. On the contrary, he made many mistakes, especially during the early stage of the economic crisis, where he constantly fear-mongered people by holding press conferences after press conferences, saying that we are running out of fuel, which we all know resulted in a run-in at the pump. Whatever is said and done, if the government is going to remove people just because they disagree with them and stand against the government, I don't think these politicians have understood the real message of the struggle we experienced last year. Let's take a short break. This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back everyone to the State of the Nation. Last week, China was back in the news making trade deals with Sri Lanka with the arrival of Sinopec to the fuel markets, meaning the dominance so far held by Sipetco is slowly slipping. This many see as a good thing after what happened last year, where Sipetco, the government's fuel import and distribution arm, failed to provide the necessary stocks for consumption, which we all experienced. Let's bring in Danidu Tharamasamma, who's at the data booth, to get an understanding of the deal Sri Lanka has made with Sipetco. Danidu, good to see you once again. Thank you for being here. Now, what does this agreement contain? Have state assets been sold, or what's the deal about this deal?
Right, Mai. So, on prima facie, there is no state asset being sold, but I think, as you have mentioned very clearly, it's about having an uninterrupted supply of fuel for the local markets. Now, the key factors I'll just go over very quickly. After this, actually after 2 decades, we are seeing that was LIOC that came in before. This is Indian Oil, and now we are seeing the third entrance into the market, the fuel market within our country, which is Sinopec. And we are also yet to see, which is what when we did contact the Energy Ministry, what they have informed us is United Petroleum, which is an Australian company, and RM Parks, which is a company within the United States, are also to enter into this market with a similar arrangement that Sinopec has.
Meaning it's just not Sinopec, but there will be more.
In the near future, but that hasn't been inked like what Sinopec has done. Within 45 days, which is from the 22nd, within 45 days, Sinopec will start their operations within our country, and we'll see it happening around the country. Now, that was it's under 20-year lease, 150 fuel stations as of now. I think this was the same arrangement that happened with LIOC in the very beginning.
Danidu, if I may ask, are those 150 odd stations they've constructed it, or are they taking it from someone else?
So this is what's going to happen, Mahesh. They are going to pay the CPC for storage facilities. They are going to function with the CPC, but the profit from this specific enterprise is going to go to Sinopec. What they have in the agreement is that for a period of 1 year, the profit should be retained within our country. And again, for a period of 1 year, as you have also mentioned before, they will not be relying on the local banks for foreign currency, foreign exchange, which was the clear issue that happened last year, to avert both of those issues. And as an auxiliary factor, Mahesh, we see that Sinopec will now be making huge investments in our energy sector as we move forward in order to create, not only have their fuel stations here, but to expand the energy sector within our country.
Indeed. Some see this as a good move, but then again, like you said, state assets have not been sold, so that's what's more important. I think public-private partnerships are more important at this moment as Sri Lanka's economy is trying to get its bearings back together. All right, Dhanitanamasam, as always, thank you. Joining me now is the Sri Lankan ambassador to China, Dr. Palitha Kohana. He's actually in Kandy today. Why? Well, he's been awarded a doctorate from the University of Peradeniya. Doctor, thank you very much once again. Good to see you. And let me be one of the first to congratulate you. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. Finally, Doctor, we see that China has resumed trade with Sri Lanka again, and Sinopec entering the fuel market looks pretty positive. Is this move in the right direction?
First of all, Mahesh, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. And let me say, express my gracious thanks for your kind sentiments. I feel truly humbled that the University of Peradeniya has sought to confer this seminal honor on me. But getting on to the question, China has always been very sympathetic to Sri Lanka. Now we see some concrete movements as converting that sympathy into tangible results. Sinopec has signed an agreement with Sri Lanka to enter the Sri Lanka market in a significant way. There are other major companies also who have expressed interest in entering the Sri Lanka market. As you know, for 2 years, nothing very much happened because travel was not possible due to the lockdowns and other COVID-related restrictions. But now the movement has resumed. There are many Chinese delegations visiting Sri Lanka, and I could say that there are many Sri Lankan delegations visiting China. I hope that as a result of these interchanges, Sri Lanka will be able to benefit from the continuous engagement that myself and the embassy have had with Chinese businesses and Chinese authorities. There are other big companies. I'm confident that these other big companies will also enter the Sri Lanka scene, both for trading purposes as well as for investment purposes. In fact, I believe that if we succeed in getting these companies to come here, there will be investments in excess of about $5 billion US.
Indeed. Doctor, what about the port city? China made a heavy investment in order to get the port city made. They did all the hard work initially, but now it's just a pile of sand next to Gulf Green. Are we to see any kind of input and investment by China on this?
As I said before, Colombo Harbour made a serious commitment to invest $500 million in the proposed financial center in the Colombo port city. This was about 12 months ago. Progress slowed down considerably due to the COVID-related restrictions and also due to the political unrest that swept the country last year. But now that we have returned to normalcy, in fact, Sri Lanka is as normal as it has ever been, we can expect them to resume their interest. I'm confident that this investment will go ahead. There is also the possibility of Yunnan Infrastructure Corporation will be investing in the Colombo port city. There have been other companies which have expressed interest in engaging themselves in the development of the Colombo port city. Of course, there is no denying that the Colombo port city is situated in a locality that is unmatched in the Indian Ocean region. It sits next to India, which is a booming market. Then the Middle East is within easy reach. So is Africa. Africa is expected to be the next boom area of the world. And then to the east we have ASEAN and Australia. One could expect, if we play our cards right, play it cleverly, that Chinese companies will prefer Sri Lanka to any other location for their offshore branches. Now, the location plays a big role, but location is not everything. There are other competitors and serious competitors in the Indian Ocean region vying for the Chinese yuan. I was about to say dollar, but it's the yuan that dominates the world at the moment. So I believe that at this stage we need to play our cards very carefully and very cleverly to attract the Chinese investors. They are looking for opportunities to expand overseas. I would say not overseas, abroad, mainly because the Chinese market is reaching a point where their large corporations need to do what Western corporations did 100 years ago, expand around the world. They are doing so in Europe, they're doing so in Africa, and Sri Lanka is politically and geographically well suited for any of their expansion plans in the Indian Ocean region. We need to be very clever, very smart, and work hard at attracting them. We need to create that degree of confidence that any investor will be looking for when they go to a new location. We have to do that, and I hope that we will do so.
Absolutely. Doctor, now there's another fact that we are mostly interested in to know about. It is with regard to the debt restructuring and China's willingness to do that, since it's a demand made by the IMF. So where are we on that?
Well, I can't go into the details because the details are being negotiated among the parties at the moment. But what I can say is that China has been very sympathetic to Sri Lanka's cause. It has said that it will stand by Sri Lanka. I am very confident as the ambassador of Sri Lanka in China that we can trust China to stand by us as we go along the process of restructuring our debts or repurposing our debts. Whatever we look at it, I'm confident that China will stand by us. I'm afraid that I'm not in a position to go into the details, as the details are being negotiated by the relevant authorities of the two parties.
Absolutely. Well, we had to leave it at that. That was the Sri Lankan ambassador to China, Dr. Palthakuna. Appreciate it. A short break now. When we return, we'll find answers to the liberal-fueled question. Sri Lanka's debt is Chinese debt. Is there a truth to that? This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back everyone to the State of the Nation. Now the liberal mantra as to why Sri Lanka is in the current predicament. Chinese loans, Rajapaksa loans. Boy, they get so passionate to tell you how they are right about this fact. But a reference to all governments, especially the 2015-2019 government that actually brought over sovereign bonds that led to us being unable to handle the installments? Crickets. Not a sound from those dishonest, two-faced liberals. Let's dive deep into this subject, and for that I'm now joined by the manager at the Global China Initiative at Boston University Global Development Policy Center, Derana Moses. Derana, thank you very much for being here. Currently, the liberal economists in Sri Lanka have been more significantly, among other issues, saying that we are in this in this crisis is due to Chinese loans. They use these buzzword sentences like Chinese debt trap diplomacy. Now, as they do this to sell it to the people who do not understand economics. Now, what do you see in terms of these loans, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative? Is there really a Chinese debt trap?
Mahesh, it's important for us to understand that the debt profile for Sri Lanka is quite complex because there are multiple creditors involved that have historically provided finance for Sri Lanka. So there are two features that kind of materialize out of this complexity. The first is that Sri Lanka owes more to international sovereign bondholders at 36% of external debt than it does to China at 20% of external debt. At the same time, when you compare how much Sri Lanka owes to various bilateral creditors, China is the creditor that Sri Lanka owes the most to at 20%, and then the second kind of largest bilateral creditor is Japan at 8%. So what does this really mean when it comes to the Chinese debt trap diplomacy narrative? I think what we're seeing is that when the Sri Lankan government has taken out finance from China, they have not just used this finance to support infrastructure projects and various development projects throughout Sri Lanka, but finance from China has also been used to address certain different debt issues or debt repayment issues to other creditors. So in the case of the Hambantota port, that is often used as an example of Chinese debt trap diplomacy narrative. What we know is that during the time of 2017, after Sri Lanka had already taken out finance in 2007 and 2012 from China Export-Import Bank for the port, in 2017, the port was losing money, and so there were several kind of foreign exchange reserve shortages, and the Sri Lankan government leased part of the port, so around a 70% stake, for the purpose of cash infusions of about over 1 billion to service certain international sovereign bond debts. So in this case, we do not see an example or evidence of Chinese debt trap diplomacy narrative where China seizes assets in the event of non-repayment. Rather, we see that the Sri Lankan government leveraged Chinese finance for the purpose of having enough money to service other debt.
Indeed, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. That was the manager at the Global China Initiative at the Boston University Global Development Policy Center, Derana Moses. Now, when we return, the Canadian deception. This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to the State of the Nation. Now, Canada, more like Hi-yo Canada. Well, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said recently that the stories of the Tamil Canadians affected by the conflict serve as an enduring reminder that human rights, peace and democracy cannot be taken for granted, and that's why Parliament last year, that is the Canadian Parliament, unanimously adopted the motion to make May 18th Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. The Canadian Prime Minister, while drinking the Kool-Aid of the LTTE, completely went on a false narrative that is only entertained by the Colombo liberal idiot class here in Sri Lanka. Now, that statement did not sit well with the Sri Lankan government for obvious reasons, so the Foreign Ministry released a statement slamming it. See, if you look at events about this Tamil Eelam issue in Canada, it's evident that the LTTE propaganda arm, led by several people in the Canadian parliamentary system like Gary Anandasangari, Vijay Thanigasalam, Logan Karnapathy and Nathan Sham, they have managed to infiltrate the Canadian political system tactfully and have worked very hard to bring results for their Tamil Eelam dream. They have managed to spread disinformation within the Canadian government and its political circles about what really happened in Sri Lanka during the war against terrorism. For quite some time, the West has been trying to bring this narrative that Sri Lanka's war was a civil war, which is a bunch of bull. The Sri Lankan government nor the military fought against the Tamil people. It was not an ethnic war. It was a war against terrorists, ruthless, worthless, cowardly terrorists who our heroic forces managed to get rid of. Even the United Nations has never said that there was any war crimes in Sri Lanka. But lo and behold, the West wants to keep that dream alive of fake war crimes. Why? Well, we know now because of our allegiance with the East. Tell a sob story to a Canadian. Boom, endless possibilities. It's very evident to anyone outside of Canada that the LTTE diaspora is fully manipulating and benefiting from the ignorance of Canadian politicians. Yet they're turning a blind eye. Why? Well, it's all about votes. In a way, we Sri Lankans should be happy about it because, after all, now we can safely say that Tamil Eelam has indeed found a new home in the state of Ontario, Canada. Anyone still in Sri Lanka dreaming of Tamil Eelam homeland? Well, your destination is Ontario, Canada. They accept you with open arms. Let's get more perspective on this story, and for that, joining me now from Toronto, Canada, is law professor at the Laurentian University, Canada, Professor Neville Hevike. Thank you very much, Professor, for being here. Good to see you once again. Now, since the last time we spoke about this issue, the Canadian government has moved to embrace the LTT fellowship fully. So why is the Trudeau government so deaf and blind to the truth?
Thank you very much, Mahesh, inviting me for this program. Before answering this question, I need to explain a bit history about this issue. Soon after LTT defeated in Sri Lanka, one of the individual from Scarborough Rouge Park tried to meet the KP branch, leader of the KP branch in Malaysia. However, basic idea is to meet him to establish the idea of genocide, Tamil genocide, because he lost the military, then they want to establish the genocide, idea of the genocide. But they couldn't meet the KP branch and his leader because Malaysian authorities and Sri Lankan authorities, intelligence services get together and arrested him. So therefore, he couldn't get into there. In addition to that, what happened, Trudeau government at the 2014 and want to come for the election, and they Scarborough Rouge Park, Mr. Gary Anandasangari requested for the nomination. That nomination was granted for the Scarborough Rouge Park. In addition to that, they organized many fundraising events. That fundraising events, some of the LTTE former cadre also participated. As example, I can tell Tiva Paramasoti, and there was some photographers there. And so in that case, there was some association with the Trudeau government with the LTTE propaganda machine to do some activities to please them. That is one of the reasons Trudeau government wants to more lenient and more supportive for the LTT sympathizers, because of they want to get the votes. Then other issue is that now Trudeau government is a minority government, and so they are looking for next election, and they are seeking more support for the minority groups, and they want to please the other group. That's why they came against Sri Lanka to issue the that particular statement.
Indeed. Finally, Professor, we are short of time. What do you think we as Sri Lankans here in Sri Lanka needs to do in order to change this narrative now led by the terrorists themselves?
Because only what we can do, we had to come with the truth. I mean, the truth is the most important thing. And we had to come with the organizing very constructive manner, advocating and giving a public awareness about what happened was in Sri Lanka. But as long as we are not doing that one, and we may not able to succeed, and all the time we will hear the against an anti-Sri Lankan rhetoric by LTTE sympathizers, LTTE Tamil diaspora. And but very important factor I would just like to mention here, and during the war, most of the Tamil, they left the Sri Lanka not because of the army activities, and they left Sri Lanka because of the LTTE, and they want to protect their children, and therefore they left Sri Lanka and they find the way to come to Canada. And so it is the moderate Tamils are completely against with the LTT activities. So what's going with that? Because I am receiving full support from Tamil diaspora group and moderate group, and they also want to counter this allegation. So then other important factor, soon after they come to Canada, and 95% of the Tamils, they get the permanent residentship after the refugee status. 95% of they go back to Sri Lanka. So then how it can happen for the genocide claim? It is a completely false narrative. We have to counter that.
Absolutely. All right, we have to leave it at that. That was the law professor of Laurentian University, Canada, Professor Neville Hevake. Now, what is the Sri Lankan government doing about this matter? As you heard before, our government is lackluster in supporting the Sri Lankan Canadians to get the message across and actually fight the LTTE narrative now plaguing the whole of North America. Joining me now is State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Saraka Balasuriya. Thank you very much, Minister, for being here. Now, step by step, Minister, the LTTE propaganda arm is taking over Canada and is becoming an international force that is having an impact on Sri Lanka. First, they started with the Ontario Bill, then it became the Genocide Week, then they sanctioned 2 of our presidents, and now this. We saw in each instant that the Sri Lankan government stated its displeasure by releasing statements. It seems like the Canadian government doesn't give 2 hoots about our government's displeasure. So what are we actually doing that is tangible to ensure that the LTTE will not rise again in any form?
Mahesh, I think the question has 2 parts to it. Whether the LTT rises, what we can do to prevent the LTT rising, and whether the actions by the Canadian government. As far as the actions by the Canadian government goes, it's very unfortunate. But in Canada is a sovereign country, and they can take the decisions which they want. And of course, we have expressed our displeasure several times. Whether, as you put it, whether they give 2 hoots about the displeasure or not is it's something up to them. But in diplomatic in a diplomatic way forward, I think that's what the friendly countries do. If they have interfered in another country in an unwarranted way, we express our displeasure. But as far as and it's very unfortunate because we see that this stemming from I would feel that the internal politics of Canada, where they feel that the Tamil diaspora has a significant vote, and in order to pursue the Tamil diaspora, some of the Canadian politicians take to the lies and the propaganda of the Canadian the LTT diaspora. So now, would that result in the LTTE being coming back as a force? I don't know. Certainly, they are making some voice about it, and I think also this has a bigger narrative, because I feel it's a lack of some countries, or particularly some Western countries, lack of understanding of the Eastern values. Problem which has been epitomized by a recent Twitter picture of the Prime Minister Trudeau shaking hands with the Japanese Prime Minister. So I think the best thing which we can tell the Canadians is that, what they're doing is not helping Sri Lanka. If they really want to be a true friend of Sri Lanka, they should work with the Sri Lankan government and help Sri Lanka by these false narratives which they are taking. Certainly, it's very divisive, and it can only aggravate the situation in Sri Lanka. And it's shameful that some Canadian politicians are taking this stand based on their in order to pursue votes for their election purposes.
Indeed, Minister, thank you for that. And it's very heartening to hear that our government is now thinking along the lines of that if they cannot help us, then they are not a true friend. And Canada, for time after time, Minister, is proving that they are not a friend of Sri Lanka, but a loyal friend to the LTTE. Appreciate it. Minister, thank you very much. That was the State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tharaka Balasurian. Now, there is one party which we need to ask as to what they think about this whole drama. It's none other than the Tamil community living here in Sri Lanka. Do they agree with the narrative of what the LTTE diaspora in Canada is stating? Earlier, I spoke to the leader of the Jaffna Civil Society Centre, Arun Siddharth, to get his view on the matter. Watch.
You see, Mahesh, we as Tamil community living in Sri Lanka, majority of Tamil people, we are not agree with that statement which was given by Canadian Prime Minister. That we see it's a political motivated or political. It's a political statement because he is targeting the voters in Ontario and making such false claims. Because I know the person who brought this Bill 104, it means Tamil Genocide Education Week Bill. It was a private bill and submitted by a private member in Ontario Parliament. His name is Vijay Thanikasalan, and he is a proxy of LTTE, and he is the close relative of Prabhakaran, and he made so many claims in his social media platforms, say praising LTTE and praising its leader. And he usually says that I am from Tamil Eelam. He called himself, he is from Tamil Eelam. So we want to ask where it's situated. So it's purely a separatist and terrorist encouraging statement from Canadian Prime Minister, and we condemn that.
Well, that was the leader of the Jaffna Civil Society Centre, Arun Siddharth, speaking to me earlier. Let's take a short commercial break. When we return, the saga about Prophet Jerome. This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to the State of the Nation. These days on social media and even on mainstream media, the much talked about conversation is about a self-proclaimed prophet called Jerome. The majority of Sri Lankans are confused with this individual. Why? Because they are trying to figure out, when we have famous Christians like the cardinal and the usual priest whom we see wearing cassocks, who is this guy called Jerome and why is he calling himself a prophet and what does he have to do with the Catholic Church? Because for most Sri Lankans, when you talk about the Christian faith, they only think that Catholicism is Christianity, which is utterly false. There is a multitude of Christian sects in the world which are called denominations, just like the main 4 sects of denominations in the Buddhist faith here in Sri Lanka, like Amarapura, Malvatu, Askiri and Ramanya. Now, when it comes to the Christian world, there are main established denominations like the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Baptist Church, and the Methodist Church. Now, these denominations have been in existence for more than 100 years. Hence, they are well-established churches. Yes. They all preach and believe in the same God. When God says unite, human says, why don't we go and separate? The denominations are honestly the most un-Christian-like way to worship the same Christ. Now, getting back to our subject, Prophet Jerome comes from something called a free church. These churches are found in modern times by anyone for that matter. And in North America, these free church leaders are very influential, powerful, and more importantly, wealthy to levels you cannot even imagine. If normal people are parking cars in their driveway, these guys park jets. That's how rich they are. In Sri Lanka too, we find this free church concept taking a prominent role, mainly because it's very catchy, fashionable, and more modern. It's not like going to an age-old building, singing the same hymns, saying the same prayers, listening to the same sermons, and then when you walk out of the church, you go back to sinful life, doing the same sins day in and day out. The younger generation tends to lose interest in the old way of worship because the established old denominations are not so welcoming to the questions of the young, or basically, the church is not in the modern times. Even I had issues pertaining to the church when I was young. Why does Jesus tell, this is the question that I had when I was young, Jesus told a rich young man, which we read in Matthew chapter 19, verse 21, to leave all his riches to enter the kingdom of God. And then on Sunday and in church sermons and services, all what you see is priests garlanded in golden robes and various expensive jewelry and telling the congregation, give all you have to the poor. I mean, practice what you preach, right? Anyhow, these days, Prophet Jerome didn't become the conversation of the day by questioning the established denomination, but more so making a statement about another religion on Buddhism. Watch.
Their focus is enlightenment.
ඒ අයගේ අවධානය යොමු තියෙන්නේ ආලෝකමත් වීම ගැන.
But to be enlightened, you need light.
නමුත් ආලෝකමත් වීම සඳහා ආලෝකය අවශ්‍යයි.
The Buddha himself, the name Buddha means enlightened one.
බුදුන් කියන නමේ අදහස් තමයි ආලෝකමත් තැනැත්තා කියන එක.
Ladies and gentlemen,
නෝනාවරුනි මහත්තුරුනි,
what is greater?
මොකද්ද වඩා උතුම්?
Light or enlightened?
ආලෝකයද ආලෝකමත් වීමද?
Jesus said, I'm the light of the world.
යේසුස් වහන්සේ මම ලෝකයේ ආලෝකයයි.
So I tell you now,
ඒ නිසා මාබට කියනවා
Jesus didn't say I'm the enlightened one.
යේසුස් වහන්සේ කියනවා මම ආලෝකමත් වූ තැනැත්තා කියලා.
No.
නෑ.
Jesus came from a different wavelength.
යේසුස් වහන්සේ ආවේ වෙනත් තරංගයකින්.
Jesus said I'm the light.
යේසුස් වහන්සේ කිව්වා මම ආලෝකයයි.
So I submit to you.
ඒ නිසා මාබට ඉදිරිපත් කරනවා.
The Buddha was looking for light.
බුදුන් හෙව්වේ ආලෝකයයි.
He was actually looking for Jesus.
අතරම උන්වහන්සේ හෙව්වේ යේසුස් වහන්සේයි.
This is why every Buddhist needs Jesus.
මේ නිසා සෑම බෞද්ධයෙකුටම යේසුස් වහන්සේ අවශ්‍ය වන්නේ.
This is why every Muslim needs Jesus.
මේ නිසා සෑම මුස්ලිම් කෙනෙකුට යේසුස් වහන්සේ අවශ්‍ය වන්නේ.
Well, now, his statement was so blasphemous that several Buddhist clergy and followers went to the CID to complain, and an active investigation is ongoing to determine whether there was wrongdoing on the part of Prophet Jerome. Not only these individuals went, but the president also said, look into it. There are shady dealings in Prophet Jerome that needs clarity. For a simple example, he's very much attached to this individual named Prophet Ubud Angel, a British Zimbabwean televangelist. I know you don't become guilty just by association, even though it looks like it. But then the riches surrounding Prophet Jerome's church are what's puzzling most. Prophet Ubud Angel is implicated in several money laundering scams where he's accused of funneling gold out of Zimbabwe to clean black money. Prophet Uber Angel visited Sri Lanka many times at the invitation of Prophet Jerome. Watch.
Joy is the oxygen of angels. Angels only enter environments of joy. Angels invade environments of joy.
As soon as he mentions angels entering into the environment of joy, look who is walking into the auditorium.
What was I just talking about? I said, in a joyful environment, angels will come. I just said it, and you see. My father did tell me one day we will come without telling you. He said it to me. And I said, oh, okay, I'll wait for that day. But did I know it was today? And I introduced to you my father, the master of prophecy, the godfather of the prophetic movement, the ambassador of ambassadors, the diplomat of diplomats. Hey, the one and only major. There's not two. The prophet to all prophets, a teacher to all teachers. Angels learn from this angel, my one and only spiritual father.
With this God-ordained surprise, the multitudes entered into an atmosphere of joy and experienced an incredible angelic encounter.
And I want to thank my son, your prophet, the prophet of God. I love you so very much.
Now, Prophet Jerome's statement about Buddhism not only sparked a conversation asking this pertinent question by many laymen like us, who is under the impression that there's the freedom of speech protection by our laws, but does that not extend to questioning the Buddhist faith? Mind you, Sri Lanka is a Buddhist nation. So let's get clarity on this. Joining me now to get a better perspective is President's Counsel, Manohari De Silva. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Now, there's a big conundrum here for us laymen. The very little Buddhist teachings I've followed, mind you, sir, I am a Christian, and my apologies in advance if this sounds wrong. My confusion is that Lord Buddha taught about love, forgiveness, and understanding. And in an instant like this, we see an individual who's clearly misled, making an erroneous statement. Now, how come the law of the land is trying to punish him while the teachings of Buddha clearly says otherwise? Is the law of the land, when saying that it gives the utmost place to Buddhism, following a different approach? According to the law, no citizens of Sri Lanka can criticize Buddhist teachings?
Mahesh, the question is not whether a person can criticize Buddhism or not. The question is, you cannot violate the law of the land. The penal code says whether it is Buddhism or whether it's Christianity or whether it's some other religion, you cannot hurt the feelings of another. And if you hurt the feelings of another, or if you insult that religion, and if another person would feel that his religion is being insulted, then the penal code provisions will intervene. And it has nothing to do with Buddhism. It's the law of the land. The penal code was enacted long time ago. It has nothing to do with Buddhism being having the foremost place, or that this being a Buddhist country. This is the law, and it applies to any religion, either it's Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam. If you hurt the feelings of somebody else, then you violate the law, violate the provisions of the penal code. That is the question. It has nothing to do with Buddhism.
Absolutely. So now, freedom of speech is a question that I've personally grappled with. Where is the line on that? When can we definitely say that someone has crossed the line and is no longer freedom of speech?
Well, your right ends when the other person's right begins. Now, you can exercise your right. You have the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, but certainly you cannot use your right to freedom of speech and expression to hurt the feelings of somebody else. Now, the Article 15 of the Constitution very specifically says that on the ground of religious harmony, the freedom of those freedoms can be restricted. So that is what the Penal Code has done. The Penal Code has restricted your freedom of expression to that extent. So if you violate the law, then your freedom of expression will end at that point.
Indeed. So now, is the law regarding freedom of speech clear in Sri Lanka, or should there be changes to it? And if so, what do you propose?
No, freedom of, I think it's quite clear. Freedom is given in Article 14(1)(a) of the Constitution. So you have that right, but it is subject to restrictions. It is restricted by Article 15. In anywhere in the world, even if you take international instruments, there is no freedom which is not restricted except very few rights like freedom, the right to life and so on. The right you must exercise according to law. So the law can prescribe the boundaries of which will determine your, so that is what the Penal Code has done. So you can freely exercise as long as you don't violate somebody else's rights.
Indeed. All right, we have to leave it at that. That was President's Counsel Manohar Silva. Thank you very much. A short break now. I'll be back with the closing. Fight is not over. How much our leadership undertakes a defeatist attitude, we must not let it internalize within us as a nation. Our war heroes prove that we are a winning nation, a nation that can ride against the tide at all odds and come out on the other side as a victor. Unfortunately, it is hard for me to see any leaders in this country who sees it in this way anymore. There is not a day that can go by where we don't have to hear the phrase, the IMF is the only option, which is a false narrative. There are other options that the liberal clowns have tactfully managed to keep out of our conversations. My call to all of you tonight is to look the other way. When the entire mob tells you to focus on one thing and that thing alone, don't be afraid to look the other way and ask, what about that? We owe it. We owe it to the people that laid down their lives. We owe it to the time we borrowed from the youth of the war heroes that liberated us. Before we wrap up, I want to pay tribute to the queen of rock and roll, Tina Turner, who passed on last week at the age of 83. As you know, our generation grew up to her music, and it gave us true quality experience and uplifted us in many ways than one for many decades. So tonight, I want to end our show with the hit single, Simply the Best by Tina Turner herself, as she was indeed simply the best. I'm Mahesh Johnny. From all of us at Other Derana 24, have a good night and a productive week. I'll see you on Tuesday on Get Ready.